Welcome to round 9 of the President's Cup. This was the last round. The tournament had already gone down the drain, but I was looking to play a nice game to finish it up. I was here on the white side against candidate Master Thompson. I set a 1d4. I mean, I'd basically, again, given up doing any serious opening prep. So I was just playing sort of the natural Catalan type setup that I played for this tournament and also the nationals. So knight f3, d6, but for him in the nationals, he played d5. We played this system in the open Catalan when we played an early c5, and I got outplayed out of the opening. So for this game, I looked at this line more closely to see how I should have responded. That was basically what the opening prep I did. And so on move 2, he deviated. He just went d6 this time, and he played like a Pietz-like setup with g6 and bishop g7, and we both castled. So here I decided to put my bishop on b2, so I played b3. He played c5, striking back in the center. I put my bishop on b2. He took the pawn. My knight took back. And the position is kind of okay here, but he absolutely has to continue with the move d5. Basically, he has to take his fair share of the center because I already have very nice pieces, and his fianchetto bishop is about to get neutralized by mine. So the center is the main problem here. I'm threatening to play the move c4 to take over the center, and then my knight will have very nice squares here on d5, working very nicely with my bishop here on g2. He has to stop me from doing all that by playing d5. He does not. He plays a6, and he's kind of playing like a Sicilian where my knight on d4 is threatening to come to b5, but here I'm not really threatening to do anything like that because these squares on d6 and c7 are not as weak as they would be in most Sicilians, where you might have moved your e pawn already. So the move a6 doesn't really do all that much here, and worse off, it allows me to play the move c4, and now I'm starting to threaten to take over. He continues with e5, which is again even worse because now he exposes this weakness here on d6. Again, you can play moves like this in certain Sicilians where you have counterplay on the c file with like a b5. e5 is acceptable, taking the weakness on d6 in structures like that, but here it just absolutely does not work. As my bishop, my knight just drops back to c2. He goes knight c6, I go knight c3, and again he's facing some issues here. If he just goes bishop e6, which is like the normal move, the problem is that he's never going to play the move d5 because I just have it protected way too many times, like 4 times. So he's never breaking through, and so he's never taking care of this weakness on d6, and so he's always going to be worse. If he allows this, if he plays, he allows me to even go e4 and clamp it down even further. And now it's like a position is strategically when I'm going to put the knight in here on e3. One of them is going to live on d5 forever. I'm going to double on these files. I might even go like f4. It's just a beautiful position. So after knight e3, what he did was that he started with bishop f5 first, not allowing me to go e4 like I would love to. And then I went knight e3, and then he went bishop e6. So that at least I don't have my ideal setup, but I still have a very good, comfortable setup. So I played queen d2, aiming to double down the d file, put pressure on the d6 pawn. He played queen c7, the rook on f came to d1. He played rook a d8 to defend. Then I played rook a c1, and because I wanted my rooks on these 2 files because because of where his queen is, right? So I'm going to play knight d5 at some point, and he's never going to be able to take because of the pin down the c file. So he dropped back with queen c8, and here his idea is that he wants to go bishop h3 and try and trade off my strong bishop. But again, it doesn't really do all that much. Even if we trade these bishops, the rest of the position is still just much more comfortable for me. So I played knight c to d5. Now I'm ready to take over that square on d5, and he can't really do anything about it. If he takes with the knight, I take back with the pawn, and these 2 pieces are fogged, and this guy is pinned, and he loses. If he takes with the bishop, I take back with the pawn, and this guy is pinned, and he loses. So he has to live with the knight on d5 basically for the rest of the game. He decides to go bishop h3 as was his plan, but he had planned to play knight b6, just a slightly annoying move because you've committed to defending your bishop here on h3, and you don't have these 2 squares because of my knights. So it leaves your queen with only 1 square because my knight and I hit these 2 squares. So the queen comes to e6. And then I play bishop d5, just being a bit cheeky, because again you can't take that bishop. The pawn takes and you're fucked. So the guy that I want to trade, you can't even trade. He has to go queen e8, And then I just brought my bishop back to, because now he is actually threatening to take my bishop. I don't want to exchange those pieces, so I just play bishop h1. Just left his bishop here on h3. My bishop is still doing beautiful things down the diagonal. I don't know what your bishop is doing. You still have this problem here. You still have these problems here. I still have these two guys who are doing God knows what. So the position was just very, very comfortable. He came back to e6, and here I played b4. So again, if he does nothing, like it goes like h6, I'm going to play b5, and I'm going to kick this guy out of there, and then I'm going to win the b7 pawn. So like if it takes, knight drops back. I mean, that pawn is just hanging. There's probably even stronger moves. I mean, the position there is just completely winning. So he has to react in some way. So after b4, what he decided to do was he went e4. The idea being he wants to physically shut out my bishop, and then maybe bring his knight here into e5 and do something with the knight. But yeah, that just doesn't work. Because the pawn on e4 is overextended, because again, he can never play d5 to naturally protect that pawn with another pawn. And so that pawn is a very, very sore weak point. It's already attacked once by my bishop. It's defended twice, but I can easily add more attackers onto that square with my queen, and eventually that pawn is going to fall. So I wanted to go queen c2, right? But I can't go queen c2 immediately because my pawn on b4 is hanging. So I mean, that would just drop a pawn. So I started by playing knight on b back to d5. My knight has completed it. I was already done what it was sent to do there on b6. So it comes back to d5, holds down the b4 pawn. Now I can switch my queen over and try and target that weak pawn. And then he continued with his plan with knight e5. He wants to bring the knight in here, maybe get some exchanges in, maybe pretend like he's getting some sort of kingside attack. There's nothing like that going on here. And yeah, I had a funny idea of switching my knight. So my knights here are strong, of course, but the knight on e3 is starting to not do anything useful. So I thought of rather switching them up so that I'll have knights on d5 and f4 instead. So I played knight f4, hitting the queen, hitting the bishop. The queen dropped back to c8, and then I play queen c2, targeting that guy. Now there's no way to defend it. It's attacked twice. It's defended only once, and you realize that there's no way to add another attacker to it. So he had to try and get some counterplay. So he takes the knight to g4, hoping to get some exchanges in. And in positions where you are better, especially when you have an advantage in space, you don't really want exchanges like that to occur. Also, the knight going to g4 breaks the coordination between his queen and bishop. So for now, at least, that guy is hanging on h3. Of course, if I take it immediately, he takes here with tempo on my queen. So I have to take back, and then he gets his material back. So if I have a way to avoid the exchange, it has to be good. And I do have a way. So I brought the other knight into d5 like I'd originally planned. And now his position is starting to look very silly. The bishop is stuck here. The knight is here doing this. This guy is also hanging, by the way. And so he's basically forced to take my knight on d5. I took back with my knight. Then he played rook f8 to pretend like he's defending that pawn. But he's actually not. So I just took on g7 first. The king took back. And then I took the pawn on e4 and asked him to show me his compensation. There's absolutely none. White still has a better position in addition to the material. And I'm also threatening to play queen b2 check to get into this dark square diagonal. Because if this knight leaves, a knight f6 after the check on the dark squares could be fatal. So he plays f6 to try and offset that. I just brought my knight back to f4, again asking questions of that bishop. So his knight came back to f5. I just took that bishop. The queen took back. I played bishop g2. Queen h5, just consolidating my extra material. And now I'm a pawn up. I still have a better minor piece. I have a better pawn structure. I have better major pieces. I have better... he has the pawn weakness here on d6. It's a very pleasant position. I played rook d5, threatening to play f4 to win the guy, because the knight is pinned to the queen. And the queen doesn't have any squares to actually get out of the pin. So the queen is forced to go to h6. Ugly. And then I just doubled on the d file. That pawn is hanging. He plays knight f7, forced if he wants to keep the pawn. And I mean, just look at the position. It's quite sad. And it's quite pleasant to play games like this in classical. And that's basically the reason why I decided to show you this game. You basically can go the entire game without having to ever calculate lines against you or worry about counter play, because I mean it's just so pleasant. You are better and then you're just finding ways to convert. So here I played my rook back to d4, and I just want to unleash this bishop once again because this pawn on b7 is now super weak and I'm threatening to just win it. You can't really move the pawn. If it goes b6, I bring my queen into a4 and things will fall apart. If it goes b5, he gives me a passed pawn, so I can just push with c5, and yeah, that should be all sorts of win. So after the rook stepping back, I don't know, there's no easy way to defend that pawn. He has to do it with one of the rooks basically, and that's the reason why I did this, so that he has to move one of the rooks to the e file and break that connection between the rooks. And now c5 is extremely strong because now he can no longer take because the rook is not defended enough times. So he tried to bring his queen back in. He played queen h5, but now I saw a sequence of moves that led to a completely winning endgame, and that's exactly showed up on the board. So I played bishop f3, hitting the queen. The queen cannot go back there, so the only move along the rank is f5. So the queen came to f5. Then I took the queens up, also ruined his pawn structure a little bit. Then I played the move bishop h5. Again, he still cannot take because I take his rook. And now I'm hitting the knight, which is the second piece that's protecting the d6 point. So if he does nothing, I'm going to take that knight. The king will take back and I'll win a pawn on d6. So his next move is also basically forced. He has to play rook d7. And then I do indeed take the knight. The king has to take back. And then I trade on d6. I trade everything on d6. And the end game is completely winning. It's a pawn end game, so it's not too difficult to calculate. So all the way from bishop f3, from here I'd seen that point end game would be completely winning, and it's difficult for him to not go in for it. So all these moves happened, and yeah, to be fair, it was a nice game to play. So his king came to e6, tried to pretend like he's doing something, but my king just climbed up the board, coupled up all the pawns, and my e pawn won the game. So I think after e7 he resigned. So yeah, it was a nice way to end the tournament. It was a very fun win. It's the kind of win that I mean, you don't have to stress all that much. You can win without your heart rate ever really going above 150, which is nice. So yeah, I mean, it was a nice end result from the opening preparation, understanding the middle game a bit better, because I mean, after he went wrong in the opening, the advantage was very smoothly carried over to the rest of the game. That's, I mean, it's basically how I like to win my games without too much trouble. Thank you very much for tuning in. See you later. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, drop a like. Happy chessing, and I'll see you later.